There are many ways to make digital video look more cinematic. You can change the lighting, color grade the footage, use filters, or simply change the way you compose your shots. But there is another approach that actually changes how the image enters the camera, and that is an anamorphic lens. Unlike a conventional lens, an anamorphic lens optically compresses a wider horizontal image onto the camera sensor. When that image is later de-squeezed, you get the wide cinematic presentation associated with movies, together with distinctive horizontal flares, stretched backgrounds, and characteristic oval bokeh. Today, I am testing something particularly interesting. This is the SIRUI Astra 50mm T 1.8, 1.33 times full-frame autofocus anamorphic cine lens. And yes, the important word here is autofocus. Let's take a closer look. The Astra arrives in packaging that immediately gives the impression that this is a serious piece of filmmaking equipment. Inside the box, everything is well protected, and the lens itself comes with a carrying pouch, lens caps, cleaning cloth, documentation, and warranty information. But the lens is obviously the star of the show. The first thing I noticed when taking it out of the package was the build quality. This does not feel like a conventional lightweight photography lens dressed up to look like cinema glass. The body is made from aluminum alloy, and the entire construction feels extremely solid. My version is the 50mm blue flare model for Sony E-Mount. The Astra series currently includes 50, 75, and 100mm focal lengths, and all three share the same T1.8 maximum aperture. This 50mm E-Mount version weighs approximately 620 grams. That gives it some reassuring weight without making the setup unnecessarily heavy. The dimensions are also very reasonable for a full-frame anamorphic cine lens. The focus ring is large and easy to reach with cinema-style gearing around it. This is useful if you want to use a follow focus system, but it also provides excellent grip when focusing manually. The focus scale is clearly marked in both feet and meters. The focus ring has a long and smooth rotation, which makes precise manual adjustments much easier than with many standard autofocus photography lenses. And then we have something unusual for an autofocus lens, a proper cinema-style aperture ring. You can choose between clicked and clickless operation. Clicked aperture is useful when you want clear physical feedback while changing settings. But for video, I generally prefer the clickless mode because it allows smooth exposure changes during a shot. There is also an iris lock. When the aperture ring is placed in the automatic position, the camera can control the aperture electronically. The lock helps prevent accidentally moving the ring away from this position. On the side, we also have the autofocus and manual focus switch. This is important because Astra is designed to work in both worlds. You can use it like traditional cinema glass and pull focus manually, or you can take advantage of modern autofocus when working alone. There is also a customizable function button. At the front, we have a 67mm filter thread, which is a convenient size if you want to use an ND filter or other accessories. The minimum focusing distance of this 50mm version is half a meter, and internally, this lens is considerably more complicated than a typical 50mm prime. The optical design uses 18 elements arranged in 14 groups, including cylindrical elements responsible for creating the anamorphic image. But probably the most important specification is the constant 1.33 times squeeze ratio. When shooting conventional 16:9 video, de-squeezing the image produces approximately the classic 2.4 to 1 cinematic widescreen presentation. Instead of simply cropping away the top and bottom of a conventional image, the lens captures additional horizontal information optically, and that is one of the main reasons anamorphic footage has its own visual character. Overall, the construction quality is excellent. Everything feels precise, solid, and professional, but an expensive-looking lens is not particularly useful if it does not perform well on a camera. So let's mount it on my Sony FX30. Before installing the lens, I have one more SIRUI accessory to add to my setup. This is a camera cage designed for the Sony FX30. A cage might not look like the most exciting camera accessory, but once you start building a video rig, it becomes extremely useful. It protects the camera body while providing additional mounting points for accessories such as an external monitor, handle, microphone, cable clamp, or other filmmaking equipment. Installation is straightforward. The FX30 fits securely inside, and importantly, I still have access to the camera controls, battery compartment, memory cards, and connections. With the cage and the 50mm Astra attached, the FX30 suddenly looks much more like a compact cinema rig. The combination feels very solid, and despite the substantial construction of the lens, it is still perfectly manageable for a relatively compact setup. Now comes the important part. How do you actually shoot with an anamorphic lens on a camera like the Sony FX30? There is one important thing you need to understand before using an anamorphic lens. The image recorded by the camera will look horizontally compressed. This is completely normal. The Astra has a 1.33 times anamorphic squeeze, so the lens is physically compressing a wider field of view onto the sensor. The camera records that squeezed image. Later, we stretch it back to the correct proportions. Some cameras, including the Sony FX30, offer anamorphic D-squeeze monitoring. At first, this sounds like exactly what we need. Enable D-squeeze, select the appropriate squeeze factor, and the image on the camera display looks normal again. But there is an extremely important distinction here. The D-squeeze display setting does not change what the lens captures, and it does not magically convert the recorded file into a normal widescreen file. Its primary purpose is monitoring. It allows you to see a corrected preview while composing your shot. The original recording still contains the anamorphically squeezed image, which you can properly de-squeeze during post-production. And this distinction becomes especially important with the Sony FX30. When I enable the camera's anamorphic de-squeeze display mode on my FX30, autofocus becomes unavailable, and the camera's internal image stabilization is also disabled. For a traditional manual focus cinema lens, losing autofocus obviously does not matter, but the Astra is different. One of the biggest reasons this lens is so interesting is precisely because it offers autofocus. So buying an autofocus, anamorphic cine lens, and then enabling a monitoring mode that prevents you from using autofocus does not make much sense for the way I want to shoot. The stabilization limitation is less important in some situations. If the camera is locked on a tripod, I do not need internal stabilization anyway. But losing autofocus changes the entire shooting workflow. For that reason, I normally prefer to leave the in-camera anamorphic de-squeeze mode disabled when I want to use the Astra's autofocus capabilities. Yes, this means the image on the built-in screen looks squeezed while recording, but that does not damage the footage in any way. It does not reduce quality. It does not change the final aspect ratio you can create. And most importantly, it does not mean that your camera is incompatible with an anamorphic lens. You have several options. The simplest option is just to shoot while looking at the squeezed image. It looks strange at first, but after using the lens for a while, you can learn to compose this way. The second and much better option for serious shooting is an external monitor that supports anamorphic de-squeeze. You can send the camera signal to the monitor, apply the correct 1.33 times de-squeeze there, and see the image in its correct proportions while keeping the camera configured for the shooting features you actually need. This is probably the workflow I would choose for more complex productions, and this also means you should not worry too much if your particular camera does not offer internal anamorphic de-squeeze at all. It is convenient for monitoring when it works with your shooting setup, but it is not required to record anamorphic footage. The lens creates the anamorphic image, the camera records it, and the final de-squeeze can be done extremely easily in editing software. So do not confuse monitoring convenience with the actual recording process. They are two different things. For my FX30 setup, retaining autofocus is much more useful than seeing a de-squeezed image on the small internal screen. And once the footage reaches DaVinci Resolve, fixing the proportions takes only a few clicks. Let me show you. Here is one of the original clips straight from the camera. As you can see, everything looks compressed horizontally. That is exactly what we expect from a 1.33 times anamorphic lens. Nothing is wrong with the file. In DaVinci Resolve, we simply need to tell the software how this footage should be interpreted. There are several ways to build an anamorphic workflow depending on your project and desired final resolution, but the important part is applying the correct 1.33 times horizontal D-squeeze. Once that correction is applied, look what happens. The proportions return to normal. The horizontal field of view opens up, and now we have the wide cinematic image that the lens was designed to create. From here, the footage behaves like normal video during editing. I can cut it, stabilize it when appropriate, color grade it, add effects, and export the finished project in my desired widescreen format. So, the squeeze camera preview might initially look complicated, but in post-production this is actually very simple. A few clicks, and the footage looks exactly as it should. Now let's stop talking about settings and see what the Astra actually looks like in the real world. Autofocus is one of the features that separates the Astra from traditional anamorphic cinema lenses. Historically, anamorphic shooting has usually meant manual focus. That is perfectly acceptable on a controlled film set, especially with a dedicated focus puller, but it is much less convenient for a solo creator. With the Astra connected electronically to the Sony FX30, I can use autofocus for moving subjects and normal everyday shooting. Here I am moving between a close foreground subject and the background. The camera can transition focus without me touching the focus ring, and for this kind of solo filmmaking, that is a major advantage. It allows me to concentrate on camera movement, framing, and the scene itself, rather than constantly thinking about pulling focus. Of course, manual focus is still available whenever I want complete control, and that combination is what makes the Astra particularly interesting. It gives you much of the physical design and optical character of cinema glass without forcing you into a completely traditional cinema workflow. Now we get to the reason you would choose a lens like this instead of a conventional 50mm prime. Look at the shape of the image. Anamorphic footage has a different sense of space. The background feels stretched vertically, highlights and out-of-focus areas have a different character, and the wider horizontal field of view changes the relationship between the subject and the environment. The bokeh is also different. Instead of the more circular out-of-focus highlights produced by conventional spherical lenses, anamorphic optics can create a more oval appearance. And at T1.8, there is plenty of opportunity to separate the subject from the background. This is particularly effective when shooting details, people, products, architecture, or scenes with lights in the distance. You can imitate a widescreen aspect ratio by cropping normal footage, but cropping does not reproduce these optical characteristics. That is the difference. The cinematic look here is being created by the optics before the image even reaches the sensor. And then, of course, we have the blue flare. This is probably the most immediately recognizable anamorphic characteristic. Point a strong light source toward the lens, and depending on the angle, you can create a long horizontal blue streak across the frame. Sunlight can produce it, streetlights can produce it, car headlights can produce it, and controlled artificial lighting gives you even more possibilities. The effect can be subtle or extremely obvious, depending on the position and intensity of the light. I would not use it in every shot. If every bright object creates a huge blue streak, the effect quickly becomes distracting, but used selectively, it can add a very strong cinematic character to a scene. This is also why choosing between blue flare and neutral flare matters. The blue version has a stronger stylized personality. For city scenes, technology, night footage, and more dramatic compositions, I think it looks fantastic. After spending time with the SIRUI Astra, I think the most important question is not whether this lens can replace a conventional 50mm prime. That is really the wrong comparison. You choose a lens like this because you want your footage to have a different character. The 1.33 times anamorphic optics give you the wider cinematic presentation, distinctive bokeh, stretched backgrounds, and those unmistakable horizontal flares. At the same time, SIRUI has removed one of the biggest practical barriers traditionally associated with anamorphic shooting: autofocus. For solo creators, small production teams, and filmmakers using modern mirrorless or cinema cameras that can completely change the experience. I can still focus manually when I want maximum control, but I am not forced to work that way for every shot. The T1.8 aperture is fast. The build quality is excellent. The lens is surprisingly manageable in size and weight, and the 50mm version works well for everything from outdoor cinematic sequences to detailed B-roll. There are workflow considerations. You need to understand anamorphic D-squeeze, and depending on your camera, using an internal D-squeeze preview may disable features you would rather keep. But once you understand that the preview and the actual recorded file are separate things, the workflow becomes much easier. You do not need a camera with perfect anamorphic monitoring to use this lens. An external monitor can solve the monitoring problem, and post-production D-squeeze is extremely simple. For me, that is a small price to pay for the visual character the Astra can produce. A conventional lens records a scene. A good anamorphic lens can make you think differently about how that scene should be framed in the first place. And I think that is where the SIRUI Astra becomes genuinely interesting. It combines the distinctive personality of anamorphic cinema with a much more modern and practical shooting experience. If you want to see more filmmaking gear, lenses, cameras, and real-world equipment tests like this, subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.